In the name of our loving and ever-present God. Amen. A couple of little Bible study pieces. Hebron is in the northern kingdom, and David was the king there for 7 years and months. And then he moved his capital to Jerusalem, where he was the king for another 33 years or thereabouts. It's an indication of the nature of the transfer of power in that particular period of time, and how the authority, that's the word I want to come to a little later, how the authority of God was given to the kings of Israel, and that they were specifically, this is language that comes out of the Old Testament over and over again, they were to be the shepherd of the sheep. They were to be the shepherd of the sheep. And for all of that, whatever that meant in those days, the understanding of the shepherd of the sheep. So the image that we get brought forward into the New Testament of the shepherd of the sheep that is applied to Jesus of Nazareth is significant. But there was never a time when the kings were supposed to be, strictly speaking, a funnel through which all the resources of the community went, or a resting place for all the resources of the community. Power in those days and authority in those days was understood to be significant in its responsibility. Significant in its responsibility. It was only through the years when we began developing kingship in its truest form that we understood how that changed over a period of time. So that's one piece, and I just happen, I love it when there are references, various places, to this place called Tarshish. Tarshish is not to be confused with Tarsus. Tarsus was that place where Paul is from, Paul of Tarsus. Tarshish is different. Tarshish is that place which no one actually knows where it is. Some people located on the coast of Spain. But basically what it means is that that's really far. That's a long way off. Those ships that go to Tarshish, man, they are out there. They go a long, long way. Very interesting to me. It's useful to just bear that in mind. Some people think that Paul comes from a long ways, but that's another argument. He left that place and came to his hometown. His hometown was what? Where was Jesus' hometown at this time in the Gospel of Mark? No. That's a good guess, though. Nazareth is a good guess, because all the other scriptures, well, exception of John. But there's that wonderful birth narrative that is in the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke. But we're referring now to Capernaum, which is sort of it's a goodly distance away from Nazareth, but it's also a goodly distance away. Capernaum's a goodly distance away from Sepphoris, which was a city of which we read nothing in Scripture, but it was only 4 kilometers from Nazareth, and a lot of people, when they talk about, well, here's a reference to Jesus as a tekton, that's translated as a carpenter, but certainly he would have, if he was a carpenter, it wouldn't have been a carpenter necessarily to build houses or to frame out houses, because houses were not made, they didn't have the timber framing, so he would have been someone who would have created the doorposts and the window sashes, or if that's what that meant, it could have also meant that he was a construction person and had a really good business going in Sepphoris, or in Tiberias, which is on the other side of Galilee. But Jesus' home, we think, was Capernaum. He's at home, and who shows up? Well, his family. Brother James, brother Joseph, brother Judas and Simon, and of course the sisters. The sisters were there.
Of course they were.
Of course they were. They're not named, which is kind of normal. When a woman is named in Scripture, that's significant. It's significant because that woman has usually been up to something, either good or bad. And if it's good, then she gets a good name and she enters into the genealogy of Scripture. If it's bad, she becomes old Jezebel or somebody like that. Well, and I'm curious as to which is the oldest of these brothers. Who is the oldest brother in Jesus' family? Well, Mark doesn't care. Mark doesn't tell us. He doesn't say that this is the oldest son. He doesn't give us the birth narrative. It's important that you remember that because it opens up all kinds of interesting possibilities. Knowing that is not intended to change how you feel about things, but knowing that is useful in the Gospel of Mark because Mark finds things important which other Gospel writers do not. And we certainly do not have in Mark's Gospel, we do not have the Trinitarian language, the language which forms over the end of that first century and cements itself into formal and authoritative Christianity in the 4th century with the Nicene Creed, etc., etc. We don't have that. We don't have that in Mark's Gospel. We don't have that. Mark's Gospel is considered to be the oldest Gospel. It follows very shortly after the Gospel of Paul. Well, what is the Gospel of Paul, Jim? You're just messing with my head this morning, aren't you? Yes, the Gospel of Paul. Those are the letters of Paul. Those are the understandings that we have of Paul. I call him the Gospel because he is trying to tell the truth in the best way he can. Sometimes, as I said before, it gets a little confusing and a little off-putting. So, what's this all about? Well, he's there, and somebody says, is this not Jesus, the son of Mary? Well, you know, that's actually an insult to Jesus. That's actually an insult to Jesus, because he's the son of Joseph. And so somebody was kind of poking a finger in Jesus' eye. And Jesus retorts to that. He says, well, a prophet is not without honor in his own country or in his own village. That's a saying that was out there. That's a saying that existed in that part of the world. And so, there's that kind of banter back and forth. And I see it as an insult, but I don't see it as them's fighting words insult. I see it as banter going back and forth at this point. Very quick, very, very interesting banter going back and forth. But what we do have here, is we have a juxtaposition, don't we? We have a juxtaposition of those persons who hear Jesus and believe in Jesus. And we have juxtaposed against that those persons who don't hear Jesus, who don't believe in Jesus. We have those representations here. We have those representations. And Jesus is amazed at their unbelief. And he's amazed that he can't do the things that he is called to do among them, those persons who don't believe. And I think that we are, as listeners to this Scripture after the fact, after they were written, I think we're meant to go, well, of course. Of course. How is anybody supposed to be persuasive in any way, shape, or form? Or how is anyone supposed to do any kind of a positive thing in this world if that person is running up against all kinds of boundaries and barriers? How's that to happen? How do we get any work done around here? How does Jesus get any work done around here? And then we have juxtaposed in that vision of juxtaposition those persons who do not have the faith or belief in Jesus. We have then he calls the 12 together. And these are meant to represent those individuals who are believers. And this is where we get the authority thing. This is where the authority passes. Jesus gives them the authority to go out and do the work that he is called to do. You can probably see where I'm going with this already, right? You can probably see this from a distance. Not very veiled today in my secret message that I'm giving you. Jesus passes the authority to the 12, and they go out and they do Jesus' work. One of the things that was interesting to me, and I raised this issue because last night in our neighborhood it sounded like Antietam. I mean, the dog was way yonder beyond. Really? Really? Do I have to listen to this all night long? There were fireworks going off in the front of our house, at the back of our house, so they were flying in between our houses. There was a fire started down there between those two houses, and people come running across and put that fire out. The sounds were big, and all of that reminds me, of course, of all the costs that involved in putting together a nation and holding it together. The sounds of Antietam last night were just the sounds. And while there was some risk involved, as far as I know, no one in our neighborhood at least lost a finger or got hurt in any way. Maybe a singe or something. But I was thinking about, when I was reading this scripture, what kept coming to my mind was that terminology, chain of command. Chain of command. I was raised in an Air Force family. I was an ROTC student for a while during the Vietnam War, and chain of command meant something to me. And I'm not talking about the line of succession. The line of succession in the United States is different. The line of succession goes from president to vice president to the Speaker of the House. Chain of command goes a little bit differently. It goes from the president to the secretary of the defense, from the secretary of defense, and this is where I get a little bit confused, to the chairman of the joint chiefs of staff, from the chairman of the joint chiefs of staff to the chair of the army or the branches of various, and then it comes down. And each of these individuals have authority. They have a responsibility. And the responsibility is interesting when we talk about chains of command. We talk about how the person who is in charge of Company B is not really supposed to give orders to anyone in Company A. That the individual is supposed to give orders or to talk to the leader, to the captain over Company A, and say, you know, would this happen, Company? And that's how it works. It works that way in the Episcopal Church, in case you're wondering. I don't get to tell those folks over at Holy Cross what to do, and they don't get to tell me. And some of you may regret that. Some of you may prefer that I would have the authority to get me to do something. But the authority is significant, and it's important to remember that, because when most of us are not required to wear on our shirts. We're not required to wear backward crosses on our shirts. You can dress me up, but you can't take me anywhere. We are given authority. We are given authority, and that authority is primarily over what we have control over, and that, generally speaking, is us, number one. And then, wherever possible, our authority is to support the authority somewhere else, in others, to help them do what they are called to do. The authority passed to the 12, and it passes to us. And the line has been long and tortuous and very difficult. And like the authority that we have been given to look after this country from whatever political perspective we bring to it, as long as that political perspective is informed by the authority that we get from God, I want to be able to hear you, and I want you to be able to hear me. But where we run into problems is when people assume the authority that does not come from God, I think. Those are the people that are sitting over here on this side. Those are the people who are instructed by something other than this wonderful, wonderful Son of God, down to whom the authority comes. So as we walk our walk, and as we listen to the ambient noise outside, and as we encounter those things which we encounter on a day-to-day living, let us remember that our authority has been given us by our baptism, or by our relationship with God, however that is defined. I think God needs all of us, regardless of how that is defined. And as we go out into the world, then let us take the authority of Jesus with us. And let us remember that as persons who represent and carry the authority of Jesus, we are visible. And I would be significantly less concerned about the visibility of our faith in the eyes of others than I am about our visibility of faith in the eyes of God. Let us go forth then, when the time is right, in the name of God.